Hey everyone, I'm Jeff. I'm a pastor at Salt. I'm stoked that you're tuning in to church online. Now, we live in a world that's hostile to people who are different. It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? You meet someone who's different to us, and we're often threatened or anxious, defensive, and hostile. And Christians live different. That's what our whole series in 1 Peter has been showing us. If you've been tuning in over the last couple of weeks, you would have heard some of the ways that Christians need to live different. And increasingly, Australian society is hostile to Christianity because we're different. And I don't think I need to convince you of that. Whether you're a Christian or not, it's obvious. A lot of the things that Christians believe are being criticized as harmful or damaging, and a lot of Christians are being slandered for holding those beliefs. And it's out there in the public. It's in movies, in shows, on the news, on Facebook, on Instagram. But it's not only in the public, is it? Because you could avoid that. It's much closer. It's in your work lunchroom when your colleague asks you your beliefs while you're halfway through a mouthful of burger. It's in your mum's group when you don't get invited to the play at someone else's house and everyone else does. It's in your family's home when your parents tell you that you're stupid to be a Christian. And isn't it time you grew up and moved on from fairy tales? It's on social media when there's some issue that everyone's talking about, and your friend asks you to post your thoughts, and your heart starts to race because you realize they're not going to like what you post. I've got some friends who are working out if they want to be Christians, and one of the barriers is that they know if they do become a Christian, people are going to be weirded out and disappointed in them. We live in a world that's hostile to people who are different. We live in a world that's hostile to Christianity. And we know this from experience, and we all know this, whether you're a Christian or you're not, because we've all been shamed for what we stand for the way that we live. We've all been intimidated by others. We've all felt pressure to keep your head down so you don't stand out. I still can't work out why anyone sits in the front row at a stand-up comedy show. You know they're going to make fun of you. Why would you want to stand out like that? No one wants that. We all know this experience. And when we're threatened, we want to fight back. We're expected to. If you don't, your friends would tell you that you need to stand up for yourself more. Sadly, we live in a world that's hostile to people who are different, and Christians are different. We stand out. People notice. And in 1 Peter, that's the situation of Peter's first readers. People notice that they're different and they don't like it. This is their experience. It's kind of sprayed across the whole book. Let me give this to you quick. 2 verse 12, it says, "Live such good lives among the pagans, though they accuse you of doing wrong." 2:15 says, "It's God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people." 2:19, "It's commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they're conscious of God." 3:14, "Do not fear their threats, do not be frightened." 3:16, "There will be those who speak maliciously against you." 4 verse 3, "You've spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do. They're surprised that you don't join them in their reckless wild living, and they heap abuse on you." 4:12, "Don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you." 4:14, "If you're insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed." 4:16, "If you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name." 5:9, "Stand firm in the faith because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of suffering." Can you see? It's through the whole book. Christians live different. People notice. People don't like it. And it's always been that way. So let's be honest. Why would anyone become a Christian in a world that is hostile to Christians? Why would you become a Christian if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian right now? How could that ever happen? Well, it turns out it's quite simple. As Christians live different, people ask why and then come and join us. And it starts with Christian community. Have a look in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. 1 Peter 3, verse 8, it says this, "Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble." It's kind of funny. Peter says finally, and then he keeps writing for 2 more chapters. I've got to say, no preacher finds that odd. It's an error that many make. I hope I don't do it for you today. But you get this picture here of a Christian community that's an alternative society. You won't face the same insults and threats inside the church that you face outside. You won't be pressured to live different by people who are against you, but encouraged to live God's good ways by people who are with you. For that to happen, Christian community, church, needs these 5 qualities. And let me run through them quick. Needs to be like-minded, united, committed to the community, even if it costs, and your needs aren't immediately met. They will be met as you serve others. As you serve others, they'll serve you back, and so you're meeting each other's needs. It's the opposite of consumerism, where you commit only while it meets your needs, and if it stops meeting your needs, you choose a new church. You need to be sympathetic. We back each other. We're on each other's side. When one of us is hurting, we all hurt with them. When one of us is celebrating, we all celebrate with them. We need to love one another, which is not, warm fuzzies. Love is a verb. It's a doing word. It's deliberate actions here. And it's family love. The same sacrifices that people in Australia make for their family, Christians make for their spiritual family. And we're compassionate. We're concerned about each other's lives. We're looking for ways to help. And we're humble, not competing or thinking that you're better than others, thinking that some Christians deserve your care and others are unworthy of your time. No, you're humble. And humble is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's this beautiful self-forgetfulness where you're caught up in loving and serving the people around you. These 5 qualities here. And these 5 qualities make for a radically different community that stands out. And now is a great time to commit to this, Salt Church. Isolation has stripped my week back to its bare basics, but my week's starting to fill up again as restrictions lift. So now is a great time to save time for this. You don't have to go back to everything you were doing before COVID. Don't just go back because it's familiar and normal. Choose what you're going to add back in. How rare is that? We get this opportunity to choose what we're going to say yes to choose what to add back into our weeks. When do we ever get that opportunity? As you do that, prioritize verse 8. Time with people of your church. Because it takes time to love and to show compassion. And in a hostile world, you need it. We need it. And Christian community like this stands out. People notice. I used to work with a friend whose dad sadly died of cancer. And me and some others, we thought as a way to love his mum, who's now a widow, let's cook her some meals. I'd never met her before, but one of us bought an esky and we filled it with some home-cooked meals. And then we went along to the funeral, and there was about 200 people there in this small kind of chapel. It was standing room only. So we gave his mum this esky, and she was really thankful. And later on, I learned of those 200 people, of all her friends and families, only one other person offered her a meal and said that she had to come over and collect it. We were like, look, I've never even met you, but here's an esky full of meals, and you can keep the esky too. I got another friend, him and his wife applied to be foster carers not so long ago. And it's a pretty rigorous screening process if you want to be a foster carer. And they got asked a whole bunch of questions, and one of them was, what supports do you have? What close friends and family can you call on to support you? And they listed about 50 people, 4 or 6 people in their family, but another 50 people in their church family. And the guy who was interviewing them said, no. I mean your close friends, people you can call on out of the blue, people who will drop everything to come and help you. And my friend and his wife were like, yeah, 50. And this isn't the full list. We limited this list. That's what Christian community is like. Christian community stands out. It's different. It's better. Now, I know that it's not politically correct to say that. You can't say that one community is better than another. You just say they're different. We're all entitled to be whoever we want in our culture. And I'm sure you can think of counterexamples of times that Christians haven't loved. Maybe you've been deeply hurt by Christians. If that's the case, for what it's worth, can I say I'm really sorry about that? That never should have happened. You and I both know that Christians aren't perfect. Christians hurt others the same as everyone else does. I've done that with thoughtless words and careless acts. The fact that we're told these 5 qualities assumes that we don't have them all, that we need to grow in them. Otherwise, why would he tell us these? But failures, even big failures, don't eliminate the consistent reality. Christian community is different in a good way. I could tell you hours of stories of how I've seen that. But don't just take my word for it. Come and see it and taste it for yourself by spending time with Christians. Ask the Christians you know what difference they've seen in their Christian life, in church, in their community. And Christians are different in heaps of ways, but we're especially different in the way that we respond to insults. That's what verse 9 tells us. Verse 9 says, "Don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing." What's your gut reaction when someone insults you? Surely it's to insult them back, to defend yourself. You're even expected to do that in our culture. If you didn't, your friends would say, look, you need to stand up for yourself more. Stop getting pushed around. And the insults that it's talking about here are public shaming, discrediting your reputation or your community's reputation. So imagine, here's an example, imagine you're at a climate change rally and Greta Thunberg is about to speak. And just before she does though, someone comes up and grabs the mic out of her hand and says, "Everyone, I want to tell you about climate change." And Greta's like, "Okay, cool, I'll sit down, you go first." He's like, "Climate change is a hoax. It's designed to manipulate fools and idiots like you so that you waste your time and money on a pointless cause instead of making a real difference in the world." And then he hands the mic back to Greta. I mean, what are you expecting there? How is the crowd going to react to that? That is not going to be pretty, right? How would a Christian react to a situation like that? Christians bless. A Christian would speak well of the person who insults them. We want to pray for their well-being and seek their good instead of insulting them back. And this isn't kind of clenching your teeth and trying to ignore it. This is sincerely wanting, praying for their best. I heard about a soldier who was, sleeping in his barracks with the rest of his unit, and every night he would read the Bible and pray before he went to sleep. And every night the soldier across the aisle from him would insult him every time about how stupid he is to believe in God, how evil Christians are, the usual stuff. And one night, as this soldier was sitting there, he was reading his Bible, just minding his own business, when suddenly a pair of muddy combat boots flew across the room and at him, hit him in the head. The next morning, the soldier across the aisle found his boots at the foot of his bed, clean, polished, ready for inspection. A bunch of soldiers in that unit eventually became Christians as they asked this man why. Why do Christians live this way? Here's why. It's in verse 9. "Repay evil with blessing, because to this you are called, so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." A Christian's blessed because we've been blessed. The blessing we have is that God's eyes are on us. God's ears are open to us. God's face isn't turned against us like a father who kicks their son out of home and says, "You're dead to me," turns their face away. Now, God's face is turned towards us in love. We have the blessing, the wonder, the miracle of knowing the all-powerful God as our Father, knowing the all-powerful God watches and listens and cares about you. And you already have this if you trust in Jesus. Right now, you experience a repaired relationship with God, the God who is for you, the God who loves you more than you could ever know. And there's more to come. Christians will love life and see good days in a relationship with a good God for eternity. And this is why we can repay evil with blessing. This is why we can respond to insults by speaking well of the people who insult us instead of insulting them back. And not just clenching our teeth and trying to ignore it, but sincerely seeking their best. We bless because we've been blessed with a relationship with the living, loving God. The God who is for us, the God who shows us the right way to live in His world. And this is a way of life that God has called us to, which is worth pausing on for a second and just kind of taking a sidestep, because it's a common phrase Christians use, isn't it? We talk about being called by God. And we use that phrase in a bunch of different ways. We're like called to a role, like I'm called to be a doctor. I'm called to own my own business. I'm called to enjoy my job. Or we're called to a place, like I'm called to be in Wollongong. Or I'm called to be in Ostermere or Thirroul or wherever. We talk about it as a relationship. I'm called to be single. I'm called to be married. I'm called to be a mom or a dad. There's something really beautiful about that. There's something great about it. It's that we want God to lead us. You know, God knows far better than us what's good for us. And so we want to let Him call the shots. That's often what we mean when we use that idea of being called by God. But it's really interesting, actually, just to see how the Bible uses the language of being called. It's just really important for us to let the Bible shape the way that we speak. We've got to let the Bible describe the way we do our experiences. We've got to use the language of the Bible to describe our experiences, the way the Bible teaches us to do it. Because otherwise, we can find ourselves claiming things that just simply aren't true. Like how we can use spiritual sounding language for our preferences or our desires that make them seem way more important than they actually are. Like how God never calls us to do anything that He labels sin or evil, no matter how strongly we feel God called us to that, or no matter what experience leads us to say God called us to that. I mean, if you look out for every time that the New Testament says God called you, you might be surprised. Because here, He's called us to bless when we're insulted. This is a special message for you from God. This is what God is leading and calling us to do. The really cool thing is, though, you can bless in the face of insult, whether you work as a doctor or own your own business, whether you're retired or unemployed, whether you love your job or you find it really boring. You can bless in the face of insult, whether you live in Wollongong, in Ostermere, even in Sydney. You can bless in the face of insult, whether you're single or married or a parent, whoever you are. What God calls us to is far bigger. It's more wonderful than a role or a place or a relationship. He calls us to a whole new way of life, and we live it in our roles and our relationships. And if you live God's way, life will normally go well for you. That's what verse 13 says. It says, who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? I mean, that's not how the world normally works. If I give money to a charity, I'm not expecting the charity to insult me. I'm expecting to be thanked for supporting a worthy cause. But sometimes, we all know this, sometimes you're cut down as you do good. People misunderstand you. People assume the worst. You shouldn't suffer for doing good, but you might. But verse 14, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. As God tells us what is right and what is good. And in a world full of people who are hostile to God, in a world full of people who call evil good and good evil, in that space, Christians keep doing what's right. We keep doing what God says is right, because it is. And Christians are blessed to know that. We're blessed to know the God who tells us. And if you do this, people will notice. If you do this, people will ask why, which is the point. Christians live different so that people ask us why. That's what verse 14 says. Verse 14, do not fear their threats, do not be frightened, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. As Christians live different, people ask why. What do you know that I don't? What hope do you have that I don't know about? And we need to be ready to make a reply, ready to make a defense, which can feel really intimidating because people can ask us any question. And sometimes hostile people ask you hostile questions. If you're a Christian, don't ever panic. If you're a Christian, you know how to answer any question you are ever asked with gentleness, courtesy, and a clear conscience. You might not know what to answer, but you always know how to answer. And even the what you can prepare. And people asked me questions as a young Christian. I had no idea what the answers were. So I watched, I talked, I read, I learned. We want people to ask us, and so we need to be ready when they do. Sometimes, though, in giving a defense, we can be defensive. And maybe you've been hurt by a Christian because they were disrespectful and aggressive and rude. Sometimes you're insulted as a Christian because you're a jerk, which is more or less what Peter says a little bit later in chapter 4, verse 15. He says, if you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or a thief or any other kind of criminal. Or AKA in the Jeff translation, don't be a jerk. I reckon what protects us from that is the other word in verse 15 where it says respect. And I think that's actually an unhelpful translation. I don't do this often. The English translations you have of the Bible are so good. You can trust them. But on a rare occasion, there's a better word to capture the meaning. And I think this is one of those rare occasions. Because the actual word there is fear. Let me show you this. Verse 14 says, do not fear their threats. And the word for fear is phobos, where we get the word phobia, fear. Verse 14, do not fear their threats, do not be frightened. But verse 16, give an answer to everyone who asks with gentleness and fear, phobos. It's the same word. How can you fear them and not fear them at the same time? Well, I think it's two different audiences. Don't fear the people you're speaking to, but do fear God. Because a right fear of God protects you. It protects you from being ungodly in the way that you treat people. A right fear of God protects you from being soft and watering down the message so it's unrecognizable. It's a different message. A right fear of God protects you from being silent when He gives you an opportunity to speak about your real hope. And this is a fear we all need. This is a fear I need. Because I don't want to live different and stand out. I don't want to be treated as that weird Christian. I don't want to answer questions that are asked by angry people. But I do want to please God. And Jesus is my Lord. And I have a hope to share. And as Christians live different, that's when people ask us why. And Peter says we can wait for people to ask us. And I've got to say, I really love that idea of waiting because it's not pushy. It's safe. It's like it's on their terms. It's passive. It's kind of like I just get along with sowing seeds and building bridges, and one day I don't even need to cross to them. They're going to cross the bridge and come to me, and they will ask. It feels a little bit like that quote that Christians throw around. It's probably falsely attributed to Francis of Assisi, but you'll know the quote, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. The idea, live in a way that wins people to Jesus. And I've got to say, there is a truth to that. The truth is what Peter says here. Live in a way that makes the good news of Jesus attractive, a way that commends the gospel. The message is more attractive when you see it in practice. Jesus' messengers are changed by the very message that we hold out. So you don't just hear the difference that Jesus makes, but you see it. The problem with that quote, though, is that it's a message. How do you share a message without words? You can't share a message without words. 1 Peter is true, it's right, but it goes hand in hand with Jesus' command in Matthew 28. Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. There's nothing passive there. There's no sowing or building bridges, no waiting. Go and make disciples of Jesus. And do it in a way that commends the gospel. Jesus' messengers are changed by the message we hold out. We take the message out and the message changes us. Sometimes, though, we wait because we're more afraid of losing a friend or losing respect than we are of God. Sometimes we wait because we love to protect ourselves more than we love the lost. But God is more willing to save people than I am to tell them. God is more generous in giving us opportunities to share the hope than I am to take them. So we need to step up. And let's step up together. Because we're not in this alone. It's a team effort. Verse 15 shows us that. Let me give it to you in my best possible English. It says, be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks yous to give the reason for the hope that yous have. It's plural. It's a team. And some Christians, you got to say, some Christians are just epic at evangelism. They can answer any question. They are so good at showing the difference that Jesus makes. And we should all want to get better at doing that because Jesus deserves it. Jesus deserves more people to trust and follow him. And our answers are part of seeing that happen. But it's no less a thing to invite someone to come to an event or to give them a book. It's no less a thing to share some article or a YouTube clip or some Facebook message or to share Salt Church online. It's no less a thing to pray for someone. It's no less a thing to say when someone asks you a question that you can't answer, look, I don't know, but let me introduce you to someone who does know. It's no less a thing to say, I don't know, but come to church and I'll show you the answer in the way that Christians live. It's no less a thing to live different and be noticed, but never get asked a question because they asked another Christian instead. When you hear the stories of people becoming Christians, there are hundreds of moments. There are many, many people involved, and each person was crucial. And in a world that is hostile to Jesus, Christians stand together. As we live different, people ask why. They come and join us. We bring them to Jesus, and Jesus brings them to God. Because that's what verse 18 says. Verse 18, Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. Jesus suffered evil and threats and insults, and he didn't retaliate, and he suffered those things for a purpose, to bring unworthy people to God. The one who always lived right took the place of the ones who almost never live right. And this is what fuels Christians to live different. We've been brought to God. We're in a community that God has changed and God is changing. I mean, do you think the power to be insulted and to bless could come for us? Do you think that we suffer for doing good and we're okay? Do you think that comes from us? As if that could come from us. It comes from God at work in us. The blessing of God's face on us comes by Jesus taking our place. Jesus brings us into repaired relationship with God. Jesus alone gives the blessing, the wonder, the miracle of knowing as your Father, the powerful God who watches, listens, cares about you. Jesus is the reason for our hope. So let me give you a challenge if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. My challenge to you is to be curious. There's probably half of you that thinks that Christians are weird or wrong. There's probably another half of you that's intrigued, that sees a good difference. Be curious about that. Because the difference Jesus makes is often below the surface. We don't wear special religious clothes. I'm just wearing a t-shirt. We don't do mystical, spiritual things. You haven't seen me do any of those this morning or today. The difference is in the way that we speak, the way that we act, the things that drive us. So be curious about why Christians do what they do and ask them. And if you're a Christian, here's my challenge for you. The challenge for us Christians is that the world is watching. So stand up and be counted. We need to strengthen our spines because we have the only hope for a hopeless world. Our world's hopes are like chasing dust. Our hope is living. It's real. It's certain. But Christians like being liked. I'm happy to be different as long as I'm not too different. I don't want to stand out too much or for the wrong things. But we will. Peter tells us to live this way when you're criticized, not if. When you're publicly shamed, when your reputation and the reputation of your church and your God is discredited. It's only a matter of time before Salt Church is in the Mercury for something, or some other church around us. We will stand out. We must stand out. This is God's plan. As we live different, people ask us why and come and join us. So stand up and be counted. Decide to be different in all the ways that matter. Because I heard about a man who grew up not believing in God. And he became a Christian through an event at his church. And at work on Monday, he told one of his workmates that he went to church on the weekend and he'd become a Christian. And his colleague said to him, "That is brilliant. I'm a Christian too." And the first guy said, "Really? I've never noticed. Hey, why didn't you tell me about Jesus ages ago? We've been working together for years." And the second guy said, "Well, I didn't think you'd listen. I didn't think you'd want to hear." And the first guy said, "No, listen. This is the greatest news I've ever heard. I want to tell everyone about this. I wish you told me this years ago." Let's stand up and be counted. And Salt Church, let's do that together. Let's support each other as a community, as an alternative society, where you won't face the same insults and threats inside church that you face outside, where you won't be pressured to live different by people who are against you, but encouraged to live God's good ways by people who are with you. Be ready, Salt, to share and to show the reason for the hope that we have. And finally, let me pray. Father God, you are so good to us. It is such a joy and a blessing to know you, to know that you care about us and you are for us. We praise you for Jesus because we know that we don't deserve this. We know that it's only because he was righteous, because he never met evil with insult, because he always blessed, because he always lived your way. We know it's only because of Jesus that we can be your people. We pray that we would bless, that we would live different, and that we would be willing to live so different that people ask us why, and that you would be so merciful that every time that happens, people would come to trust you. Amen.